Welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And tonight we will be discussing Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. But before we get into that, Sarah, what's something great that happened recently?
Technically, it hasn't actually happened yet, but I'm going to a concert on Friday, and that'll be lovely. So I'm calling that my good thing for the week.
Oh, the anticipation. Hell yeah.
Yeah. What's your good thing?
I thought you were going to go on for longer and that I didn't have to come up with anything yet.
I mean, I can go on for longer.
What concert are you going to? Tell me more.
So it's Miyavi and a couple of other J-rock artists have come together to form a super group of some sort, and they're playing in LA. To tell the truth, it's going to be a great concert. I'm going to have a lot of fun. I'm not actually looking forward to going, even though it is my good thing, just because it means leaving the house and leaving the pugs, and it's a lot of effort. But
I mean, I feel you. That's why you have to talk about it in retrospect. What are you going to say next week?
Well, next week we're not recording, and the week after that we'll have Galley, which is why
travel must always be spoken about in retrospect, because it's always bad ahead of time.
Well, that's why I wasn't going to go on about the concert, but you wanted me to.
I haven't had to do dishes for 2 weeks. That's been really nice.
That's a pretty good thing.
It's a very good thing. I guess that'll be my good thing.
I mean, it's as good a thing as anything else.
Yeah. Only positives, zero negatives. And when I say I haven't had to do the dishes, I mean the dishes have gotten done, not just that I've ignored dishes piling up in the sink, to clarify.
I don't think that anyone thought that you were leaving dishes to pile up in the sink.
I don't know.
I mean, your statement made it pretty clear. I thought that someone was doing the dishes. It just wasn't you.
Well, that's because you know that Danny's a kept man now. So you have the context.
I feel like that's what I would have gotten from that statement, even if I didn't have any of that context.
Yeah, but I can't use that as my good thing because I used it for our bonus episode recording. And I can't just have my good thing be that I have a house husband for now until eternity, because that's going to get real old real fast.
Yeah, but this episode comes out first. So
that's true. Okay, Daniel's a house husband now. And I could just go off and earn money and come home and podcasts, and I don't have to do any of the house bullshit. Except for, the stuff that I do because I'm an equal participant in our household and not an asshole. But other than that.
You don't have to do the dishes anymore.
Yes. Not that I ever did before, but it's faster now. This is a bad good thing. This is why I didn't have anything. Hey, my house life is great.
I mean, you could talk about how cute your cats are.
Oh, that's always true. I just edited Harrow, which came out for my today, and I spent a lot of time talking about how cute they are, and which is why I felt like I shouldn't do it again.
Yeah, but there are a couple of episodes in between Harrow and this one.
I can't keep track of time. I don't know what day it is.
We have a calendar.
I just show up and people tell me what to do. I don't pay attention to any of that.
We have a calendar where I very helpfully have labeled the episode number and the release date along with the book title.
Sarah, you don't think I look at the calendar, do you?
No, I don't actually think that you look at the calendar. I know that calendar is 99.9% for me.
I read the books in time for the podcast recordings 40% of the time. And that is the extent to which I pay attention to the calendar.
You have looked at the calendar occasionally.
Oh, I look at it to make sure I'm editing the correct episode. That's when I look at it.
So you look at the calendar?
Yeah. What you drinking tonight?
I had 2 very sad limes that needed to be used before I head off to LA. And I also had one last bottle of homemade ginger beer. So I made myself a Moscow Mule.
I assume the sad limes did not translate to the Moscow Mule.
I mean, they're like the lime juice was fine.
The sadness did not translate.
The sadness did not translate. They are perfectly fine limes in the Moscow Mule, but they did need to be used sooner rather than later.
Fair enough. I am drinking, you're never going to guess, boxed red wine.
No, what a concept. You never drink that.
Actually, this is a point of celebration because I'm done suffering from illness and then being a big martyr about it. I'm back to drinking box wine. Also, honorable mention to Kirkland brand hard seltzers because I had a couple of those earlier. That's all. They deserve an honorable mention because that's part of the vibe for tonight. Have you read anything good lately? Other than the book we will be discussing.
I have actually read something or started reading something last February, in fact. I picked up The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke, got about 30 pages into it, couldn't get any farther and put it back down. And then in the beginning of January, I picked up The Unbroken, got about 30 pages into it and couldn't get any farther and put it back down. However, I'm pleased to say that I am now about 150 pages into it. And while I still find it a little slow going, not that it's bad, because it's not a bad book. It just is not, I'm finding it hard to concentrate on it. But I'm pleased that I'm making my way through it.
Turns out, if a book's not on the podcast schedule, we're just incapable of reading it.
That's not true.
For you.
I read plenty that isn't on the podcast schedule. It just, I don't know what it is about this book, because again, it's not a bad book. Like, it's a good book, but it just, I don't know if it's the pacing or the like kind of fantasy that it is. Like, not military fantasy, but military mixed with political fantasy. Like, I'm finding it a little hard to get through.
Well, I will refrain from comment because that is not my kind of book, just from your description.
There is a reason why I have not put it on our podcast schedule.
And therefore, my opinion is irrelevant and we shall move on. Doesn't that sound nice for everyone?
Yes.
All right.
I'm going to guess that you have not read anything beyond podcast reading.
Oh, no. Absolutely not. Sarah, we have read Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. And as much as I really enjoyed this book, I would say, for the most part, I don't think it was written for me.
I had some issues with it that I'll talk about in the spoiler section. I really enjoyed it. I am, I think, part of the target demographic in the sense that I am in my 30s and I listened to a lot of Spice Girls when I was a young child. And there are a lot of Spice Girl references in this book. So that made it feel like it was written for me.
This book, well, actually, I'm not sure how much of this is spoilers or not. It's definitely a queer book, which I feel like I can say without spoiling anything. It's more queer than perhaps, well, what's the back of the book say? That'll help.
I don't think the back of the book really tells you that it's particularly queer.
Right. Most of the book follows like middle-aged women.
They're not middle-aged. They're in their 30s.
Oh, I thought they were like 40-ish.
No, I think they're like early 30s.
Okay, you're even 40-ish is not middle-aged. You're right. Adult women, established in their career / family life women. There's not really a phrase for people who sure aren't kids anymore. I mean, adults? Is that the word?
Yeah, I think that's the word you're looking for.
I don't know. I'm hesitating because there is part of this conversation that's definitely in the spoiler section. I do think, well, when we talk about why you should read this book, it's very queer, which is in some part a spoiler, but I feel okay saying just that vague comment.
I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that it's very queer. Like, you have all kinds of queer relationships, and things like that.
We can get into a better conversation when we're not worried about spoiling shit, though.
we can get into a better conversation about it later. But yes, suffice it to say, lots of queer relationships, queer characters. It's very queer.
At the very top, though, it's about several women who are part of an organization in England, which is a coven, but also a bureaucratic nightmare. I guess they aren't all part of the coven anymore. But, like, what if witchcraft got made boring? That's not fair. The women that we follow all keep it interesting, but the idea that witchcraft is bureaucratic makes me want to kill myself.
I mean, I thought it was hilarious.
Because... yes, in a funny way.
Yes. Because it's so true. Like, if there were women who had these powers, and to be fair, there are also men. There are warlocks who have magical powers in this book too, and they are also, like, they have their own, I don't recall if they actually call them covens, but
they're cabals.
Yeah, cabals. They have their own, like, bureaucratic system.
But they suck and no one cares about them, and that's canon.
That is canon.
A lot of this book is just, isn't it fun to think if it was a matriarchy instead of a patriarchy? Wouldn't it be nice? Let's pretend that there was just like a little slice of powerful society that was all run by women and that they were automatically more powerful than men.
Too bad it doesn't mean that there are less problems.
Well, certainly not, because it turns out women are still people.
What a concept.
Shock, horror. If you can find delight in that concept, then you're going to really enjoy a lot of this book, just for the sake of that alone.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go too far into this discussion because it does feel like we're answering the why should you read this book question right at the very top.
Well, in that case, hey, Sarah, what's a really fun reference that this book makes?
There's a fun reference on page 30 to a family name, the family name Device. They talk about device women. And this is a very small, it's not relevant at all to the plot, except in the sense that one of these characters is related. Like,
she is a device woman.
She is a device woman, yes. And I know that Good Omens and this book are both playing off of the same, like, real life source, but it was just nice to see a familiar name there. I was like, hey, I know this last name.
And it's fun seeing witchcraft explored in two very, well, not necessarily very different directions, but with very different considerations. I feel like, okay, I don't want to downplay this book and say it could totally exist in the Good Omens universe. It could, though. It's just more thoughtful and thorough in the concept of witchcraft, which is a really big just in that sentence there.
That's a pretty major just, yeah.
I could totally see angels and demons completely dismissing witches, however. And so if you think about it that way, it makes sense.
I could see this being part of, like, the Good Omens extended universe. I can see that. So in this book, witches have various gifts. Usually they only have, like, one kind of, we'll call it talent. If you were a witch, which kind of talent would you like?
Definitely sentience, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah, of course I want to know what everyone's thinking. I'm that nosy bitch.
I think it would be really frustrating to be able to hear what people were thinking all the time. I mean, I guess...
Okay, or healing. Healing was its own thing, right?
I think healing was its own thing, yeah.
I guess, really, if I could just, like, make everyone in my family healthy, obviously, that would be great. But only one of us has to pick that one. So I would pick sentience, and then you pick healing, and then it's fun.
Okay.
I assume that's what you were going for. You weren't going to do elemental. Like, talk about power trippy bullshit.
I actually think it would be fun to be an elemental. I mean, like, just, I could have a small localized rain cloud for my garden all the time. It would be great.
That's called a hose.
No, it's called California's in a drought.
Yeah, you're not going to fix the drought. All right.
I'm not gonna fix the drought, but I can fix the drought for my plants specifically.
Oh, I would much rather understand like what the people I'm dealing with day to day actually understand. Do you think tension's worse over a Zoom call? I guess that is kind of very relevant to my answer.
I mean, they talk about Zoom calls in this book. Like, this book is very firmly in, the 2020s, and they don't say anything about being able to read people's minds over Zoom. So I'm going to say that they can't.
In-person social situations, it would still help, but I think it would be less crucial.
I mean, I guess that like they can build barriers in their brains so that they don't hear everything when they don't want to. But it just seems it would like so distracting. And then you would obviously hear things that you don't want to hear.
Oh, I thought you could kind of
Sometimes.
control it a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can, but I'm saying what I mean is that like if someone was saying rude things about you in their head because they're having a bad day, you would still hear that if you were reading their mind.
Absolutely want to know.
I would not.
Okay, more importantly, can I use healing magic to never have to work out? Because if that's the case, then that's definitely the correct answer.
Well, the healer in this book, Elle, she uses a glamour to look younger than she is, but she doesn't just make herself fit. It doesn't sound like anyway. So I don't know if you could just do that.
But if you think about it, muscles deteriorating out of slouchiness and disuse. If you heal that, then you would have, strong core muscles and good posture. So I think it depends on your definition of healing. And that's what I would do, is I would heal myself to be really buff.
I mean, it's as good a use as any.
Thank you.
The problem with this book is that it is hard to have a conversation, a non-spoiler conversation about it, because there are lots of very major things that I want to talk about that I don't want to give away.
Well, it's a very well-paced book in that sense, that we have our setup, which is there are these 4 girls who kind of grew up together or were thrown into witch training together. And so they have that like unifying experience. And then we jump to their adulthood and we kind of see how they have all adapted differently and how they're handling it differently and how world events affect them differently. And now I have also run up to the spoiler wall. But the fact that this book, everything after the first chapter feels like a spoiler is actually very, very good. It's bad for talking about it, but it's very well done in that I feel like I don't want to reveal anything because it was such a delight to discover.
Yeah, I will say, reading this book, I mean, it just kind of flew by. It was a very fast read. I mean that as a compliment, not a negative statement. And all of the reveals were very exciting to get to.
Oh, I will pile on to your, this is just an observation, not a criticism. The font was so big. How page numbers are so meaningless. When we were getting ready for this week, I was like, oh shit, 450 pages. Like, that's a really long book. No. This book is spiritually very short.
Even though, or regardless of page length, it's a fun read and it goes by quickly.
I think this book is actually a great example of the prose itself does not require rumination, but the concepts that it's dealing with does make me think. I spent more time stopping while we were supposed to be recording and you were waiting because I was still reading. I was still stopping to exclaim to Daniel about what was happening, just because that was what was filling my heart and overflowing, and I could not stop. Versus a book that you have to like plod through. just because of how the prose is. And that doesn't mean that slow prose is bad. I don't know. That's just the situation here. It was quick. It was really quick.
It was quick. I wonder how much of that comes from Juno Dawson being primarily before this a young adult writer, because I feel like young adult books often have less frills on the prose. So I'd wonder if that's just her prior novel writing experience translating to this adult novel.
It did feel extremely blunt in moments that I think we're going to talk about more thoroughly when we are in the spoiler section. And that was sort of a stumbling block for me, just because of how frank the prose was.
Yeah, I didn't have as much issue with it as I think you did, but that one conversation that we will talk about in the spoiler section, man, this is a horrible non-spoiler section. All we do is say, wait until we talk about this subject in the spoiler section.
All right, let's do a quick intro of the characters. I would say the main character is, oh shit, I cannot pronounce her name.
Neve.
I don't believe you.
It is Neve. If you Google how to pronounce Niamh, it's Neve.
So Neve, which is apparently her name, lost her husband in the Witch War, which is very sad.
Fiance.
Whatever, partner. It doesn't matter. Same thing. He deserved to be called husband because she loved him that much.
I mean, they were planning on getting married. Yeah. Like they loved each other, yes.
The difference is arbitrary. What, were they going to go to a church?
No, but clearly they have some kind of like official ceremony within the witch coven to make marriage a thing, because they talk about, like, she calls him her fiance and other characters have husbands. So
all ceremonies are stupid. He's her husband. And our main character is a veterinarian. And that's about it. She is kind of still attempting to deal with the loss of her partner and definitely not doing it well, I would say.
Yeah, she's not over the loss of her partner by any means.
Absolutely. And then we have a couple of other characters who she grew up with, and in some cases have grown apart. Loney, I think is how it's pronounced.
Mentally, I've always pronounced it Leone. I don't know if that's correct. I didn't bother looking that one up.
There's a joke. Okay, our main characters: Neve, Ciara, Loney, Elle, and Helene. Some of them have children.
Helena or Helena. There's an A on there.
Whatever. Doesn't matter.
You got most of the letters right.
At some point, there is a rhyme with one of Elle's daughters, and she was like, oh my god, it's Loney Pony. And so I assume that it's exactly the same. I guess it could be Leone Pony, but that's awful. Juno wouldn't do that to us, right?
I think that Juno would write better rhymes, yes.
I am basing my entire pronunciation of that name off of Loney Pony, which is Holly's nickname for Loney or Leone when she was young.
I would accept that argument.
Wonderful. Speaking of Holly, she's Elle's daughter, and Elle is probably my favorite character in this book, partially because I could not fucking stand her in the first half.
What about her did you dislike so?
Oh, she epitomized that yoga mom aesthetic.
She very definitely has a yoga mom aesthetic. This is true.
And specifically was, at the beginning, was definitely like anything that ruins my perfect family image gets rejected. And I think her growth is probably one of the most delightful things in the book, for me, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would call her character arc growth specifically.
She that's spoilers. Okay, we're this is a non-spoiler conversation about the characters. She's a big old trophy wife, and she loves that identity. We'll talk about more later.
She definitely changes over over the course of the book. That change is satisfying. I agree with you.
Ciara is Neve's twin sister, and she is in a coma.
Yep, she sure is.
Loni/Leone Pony has started her own coven that's actually inclusive. Who knew that was possible?
I mean, is it really any surprise that the official UK coven is not very inclusive?
You say that, but I feel like that is the root of my discontent with most witch stories as a whole. This is, I don't know, maybe a me thing, but anytime you have any story with a witch in it, it gets really Christian-y really fast. And that's just really tiring. It starts out like, she's a witch and maybe she's pagan. And then by like Act 2, it's like, oh, turns out Satan is a thing, which therefore means the Christian God is real. Okay, that's the world that we're working in now. And that's just exhausting. And I'm the kind of person who should love witch stories. And like Wiccan and like, why do Wiccan stories always turn Christian so fast? I'm very annoyed by it.
I don't understand how that relates to HMRC being inclusive or not inclusive.
Because HMRC did get Christian, but didn't go as hard as usual, and so I'm happy about it.
No. But I mean, like the actual coven itself, like in the book. Because we're talking about inclusivity.
Yeah, because we were talking about inclusivity, and like obviously Christianity is not inclusive, so
okay,
those are related.
That was the jump. I was a little confused there. I think also that is more of a trend in like horror.
Okay,
like witchy horror.
That's a good point. Well,
because I've read a certain amount of witch books that are not horror adjacent at all, that have nothing to do with Satan or Christianity.
Excellent. I do think you're right. I think I am conflating books and movie media, but I'm mad about it in movies, and I'm happy this book didn't do that. This angry rant was just to say that this book didn't do that, and that made me very happy. Or it introduced the concept, but it didn't go too far. It wasn't not Christian-y.
I mean, to be fair, so this book is the first book in, I don't know how many books, but there's at least one more, probably going to be a trilogy, because things tend to be trilogies.
We both know it's a fucking trilogy.
Anyway, this book is the first in probably 3 books, we're guessing. And I do think that some of the Christian devil elements will come back and feature more heavily in later books.
Yeah. The Satan shit was a thing. I agree, it's not over.
I also want to make sure the listener knows that Lily is being very mad about Christianity, but they don't actually talk about God.
This is definitely just me being exhausted with witch stories bringing in Satan. And I'm very sick of it.
I'm sorry. I don't have anything further to say there.
My rant was supposed to end with, while this book does bring in the existence of Satan, it's pretty light and didn't actually bother me that much overall. But now I'm complaining about it in general, so this is not related to the book necessarily. Well,
tangentially related to the book.
It is tangentially related to the book. This book does it in a way that if every story did it this way, I wouldn't have to go on a rant. Could every story in existence, could every witch story do Satan shit the way this book does? That would be great. Thank you. Like, oh, weird mythology. Okay, let's go. That's fine. That's acceptable.
Have we actually gotten around to talking about Helena yet in our list of the main characters?
I don't think so. I got distracted by Elle and then Loni.
Got distracted by a lot of things.
Yeah.
But Helena is the head of Her Majesty's Royal Coven.
Should we just go to the spoiler section?
We should just go to the spoiler section.
Okay. I'm making a big stink, but I really enjoyed this book. It was very fun to read. There were a couple of moments that felt preachy, but not in an uncomfortable way. Like preaching to the choir preachy. And that's fine. I mean, sometimes you just gotta get that out. I get that. Otherwise, if you want some witchcraft that goes way less hard on Christianity than witchcraft normally does, which I say from a movie perspective and not a book perspective, to head off Sarah's face that I can see you're making right now.
Yep.
This is a very fun book. It's an extremely queer story about witchcraft, and that's great. And nothing else we can say can be said without a spoiler.
I feel like we have said very little of actual import in this entire conversation so far.
That's because we're trying so hard not like there are some very fun elements in this book that are delivered with very good pacing. And that means there are spoilers very early on. Which makes it impossible to talk about. And we read the back of the book, okay, specifically to try to see what we could talk about without spoiling shit. And it turns out the back of the book is just like, oh, women in their late 30s, early 40s doing lady shit. Which
early 30s, mid 30s. Not late. They're not, it's not late.
Okay, at least one of them describes himself as approaching 40, which maybe was the character being dramatic, but that was literally the only line I latched onto.
Maybe I'm just thinking, given all of the Spice Girl references, that they're my age.
How long have those Spice Girls been around? When was their big hit? Because, like, I grew up with Fleetwood Mac, but I would never argue that I'm actually however old that person is.
I mean, I also grew up with Dire Straits, and I'm definitely not like Dire Straits age, but Spice Girls, I was the target demographic for Spice Girls when they came out.
Anyway, yes, this is the Spice Girls demographic. However old you are now, if you liked the Spice Girls as a child, this book is for you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. That is a range. Fuck. I really can't say anything.
I think we have to just leave it there.
But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode of Fiction Fans is brought to you by Wet Cat Food. Have you ever considered feeding your cat something that's not just dry garbage? Lily's Cat Bard would like to remind you that wet cat food exists and your cat deserves it. This episode of Fiction Fans was brought to you by Cat Food. To avoid spoilers, skip to 53:14.
So now we can talk about all of the things that we've been trying to dance around with more or less success.
Who is this book written for? I don't understand.
I mean, the Spice Girls demographic.
Actually, wait. I take everything back. You're correct, 100%. Because the Spice Girls demographic could be either extremely understanding and accepting of queer society and trans people, or maybe part of a antiquated concept that thinks that, I don't even know how to put that into words, turfy. But that's so aggressive. That's the thing, is it feels like this book tries to explain the concept of a trans kid and like justify it for so long. And I feel like the reader either is already on your side or they're going to be very mad that you called the antagonist a turf and you've already lost them.
I mean, I don't mind how long the book spends on that struggle or justification, because the antagonist is a turf. So it makes sense that there's a lot of time spent on talking about Theo and like why Theo deserves dignity, essentially. But the thing that gave me the most pause was the conversation that two of the characters have. And in their conversation, they equate the like the backlash against trans people with Witch Hunt, which obviously like that's the whole like thesis statement of this book. I don't need it written out for me explicitly in a conversation because I get it, you know, like I do understand what you're going for here, Juno.
And that's the thing, right? Like, does Dawson expect her readers to be an ally? Or is she trying to persuade a reader that, like, hey, turns out trans people are people? Which, if that's the case, good, but maybe don't call out your antagonist as a TERF that explicitly. Like, I feel like that's going to turn anyone on the fence away.
I mean, I don't actually think that she's writing the book for people who don't believe in trans rights.
Why did she spend so much time convincing me that trans people are people? When I'm already there.
Probably because it's a struggle that they have to deal with in their everyday lives all the time. This book, in that respect, feels very grounded in reality. And trigger warning, there's a lot of transphobia in this book. You get some really nasty points of view from Helena, who turns out to be a TERF. And it's nasty and gross because transphobia is nasty and gross.
Helena's so much a TERF that she would rather be possessed by a demon than let a trans kid just exist.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's awful. And we start seeing this from her in like the second half of the book. And in the first half of the book, we don't know that she's going to turn out to be the villain.
No, she's very sympathetic, which is why I was like, okay, maybe this book is like trying to ease people into the idea.
Yeah, like I was really sad when she turned out to be the villain, because for the first half of the book, like we get her point of view and there's nothing like this. And so you start to sympathize for her and her struggles. And then bam, transphobia. And you're like, oh, okay, you're a horrible person. But then why did you spend all this time making me like you?
And maybe Dawson is making a point. Like, turns out TERFs are people too. I don't know if I'm convinced about that.
I mean,
but
I think that her point could be that TERFs get irrationally angry about this, like at the drop of the hat, and they can be fine people otherwise. Note that I'm not calling them fine people because they're TERFs, like obviously, but
do we have to go out of our way to define trans exclusionary radical feminist?
Probably wouldn't hurt. Yeah.
I have now. So the idea that a trans woman is taking away from a cis woman's experience is just not, no, it's not worth justifying or contemplating or arguing against, because it's stupid.
It is stupid.
Yeah. And I feel like this book spends so much time setting up Helena as sympathetic and reasonable. And then when she, almost the moment she comes out as being a trans exclusionary, just like nosedives into absolutely absurd, like, I would rather summon a demon than let this 15-year-old kid live her own life. Are you trying to convince me that TERFs masquerade as reasonable people? I know that too. Like, I don't get the point.
I mean, there might not be a point beyond, like, TERFs can be reasonable about lots of things until you get to this issue, and then they turn into horrible raging jerkwads.
Yeah, I guess so. I did Google the author. Juno Dawson is a trans woman, and I think that made me much less confused about what the fuck was the point of all of this, because then it turned into, now I assume that this kind of reflects her experiences and the different reactions that people have had to her transition, and I don't think that's fair either. Like, why did I have to do that? I think I'm the bad guy in that story.
There's a really good quote about not wanting to judge other practices, but judging them, like, despite yourself. And I feel like that kind of applies to what you're saying. Not that you're judging, but like, you don't want Dawson being trans to have any impact on your reading of the book, but it has.
Well, and I looked up the author on purpose because when a story is written about the experience of a trans person, I want to know if the author has any leg to stand on. I think that's fair. I would not do that just for a queer story. I would do that for a story about anything that is rooted in identity this way. I would like to know either the author has some personal experience, or I would like to find out that the author did some good research. I would never want to take a fiction author's word for how people experience their lives, because I think that gets weaponized a lot too.
Yeah.
Maybe this book annoyed me because I recognized so many conversations I had with women a little bit older than me that I've gotten so sick of having. And seeing it in a book, I was like, could you not? And then who am I to be annoyed by it?
Yeah, I get that.
So finding out that the author is much more justified to be annoyed by it than me, I'm like, oh, okay, I have to suck it up in this case. This is much more annoying for the author than it is for me.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the main character, I would say Neve is the main character.
I think Neve gets the most point of view chapters.
But the trans character is Theo, and I think it's very interesting to see a story about transitioning and about gender in the way that this story ends up being, without having the main character or the prospective character be the one experiencing that.
I mean, it was interesting that we didn't get any point of view chapters from Theo, because Theo is the one who's transitioning. But Theo's also, I mean, all of the action hinges on Theo, but Theo's not a main character
at all.
In the sense, yeah,
no,
like Theo's not the one doing the acting. Theo is being acted upon.
Which is so prevalent in this story. Like, so much of this book is about motherhood. All of these characters are addressing and struggling with motherhood in their own way. The main character, Neve, doesn't have children because her partner was taken from her too early, but she ends up basically adopting Theo and sort of undergoing motherhood in that way. A couple of the other characters have had their biological children, and then Loni is discussing the potential of children with her partner. And I just feel like that's such a strong narrative in this story. I don't know where I'm going with this, except it's there. I know it's there.
It is there. I mean, there's a lot about motherhood and your relationship with your kids in this.
I don't know if I love that all of them ended up being mothers.
As someone who's not interested in motherhood at all, it would have been nice to have one character who was like, nah, fuck that. I don't want that.
But not Loni, because I like that we saw her struggle, because it's not an easy decision. So, like, that was great.
Yeah.
All of the processes that we saw and all of the relationships that we saw in this book, I really enjoyed. I just feel like there could have been more. Why weren't there like 15 to 25 more characters so that we could actually explore all of the angles of motherhood or lack thereof? I think that's what there should have been.
There could have been a fifth main character who didn't have kids and wasn't interested in kids.
But then we also needed a main character who had kids and then decided that they wouldn't be a good parent, and so just like supports them from far away. Like, I want to see every angle.
I mean, that is a tall order for one book.
Is that fair? That if an author brings up motherhood at all, I'm like, well, why didn't you address all of the possibilities?
No, that's not fair.
Great. Yeah.
It's not fair.
Oh, that is why I loved Ellie so much. Or sorry, not Ellie. Elle so much.
Because of her relationship with Holly?
Yeah. And just, we saw her start as basically a trophy wife. She had been, I'm going to say, a nurse in the war, but like, she was a magical healer. So she was
a magic nurse.
Maybe a little more involved than that. Yeah. And then she marries a man and she refuses to tell him about witchcraft. And that's like, their relationship is not great. But we see her sort of grow as the book goes on and deal with the fact that her daughter Holly is a witch, so she can't just pretend that witchcraft doesn't exist, because now she has to be there for her daughter. And Elle just has so much. And like, I just love the idea of this woman growing beyond her identity as a wife. She had written herself into this box and then she grew out of it.
I am not sure that I agree with you that she grew out of it, because I think that she would much rather have preferred to stay there. And I think that even at the end, where she has confessed to being a witch to her husband Jez and obviously to her daughter Holly, well, she confesses to Holly a lot earlier on in the story, but
Yeah.
like, I think that if she had not been forced by circumstance to do so, I don't think she ever would have. So there's change there, but I don't know if I would call it growth.
Okay, not growth by choice, but she decides that helping this kid, Theo, go through their shit and not be subsumed by the process or the system.
Because Helena is like literally sending witches after them.
A literal hit squad.
Yeah, like they're in a battlefield. Of course she's going to choose well, I guess not of course, but
not of course. And by the end, it's that black and white. But she is choosing that path the whole time. Like, she is choosing to help Theo and Neve, even though it is making her personal situation more difficult at every turn. And if you look at it from the beginning, it's more of a slow grow. There's the night that they go out for a girls' night that ends in disaster, of course. And so when Jez is there to pick them up from the bar, I think Neve just like makes him pass out, and Elle has to explain why he doesn't remember how they got home, even though he was the designated driver. Like, I think it is a slow progression.
In that particular scenario, like, she's not telling him, oh, you were, magically not concussed, magically knocked out. Like, she does make excuses.
Right, because that's at the beginning of the story.
And I think that if she could have continued to make excuses, I think she would have.
I guess. I don't know. She could have stepped out a lot earlier and not helped. She decided that helping was more important than preserving her fiction.
Right, but I think that she would have done that in the beginning too. It's just that the situation in the beginning was not so dire that like she couldn't.
So you're saying it's the narrative that escalated, not Elle?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, like, I do like her arc, and I do like the change that she goes through, but it's specifically calling it growth that I disagree with, because I don't think it's growth.
Okay. I think she has created a small paradise for herself, and that she
thinks it's a paradise.
Of course, it's terrible. Turns out it's the worst.
Her husband is cheating on her every week.
I wonder if he stops. Oh, I guess I just have to read the second book.
Yeah.
I hate series.
I know you have this inexplicable problem.
Just write the story.
Okay, for all that I'm arguing with you, I did actually kind of have an issue with, so there's a cliffhanger at the end of the book where Neve goes to go visit her sister Sierra, who is in a hospital because like Neve basically purged all character from her during the war because she was possessed by a demon on the side of the bad guys.
Not just possessed by a demon, but she was trying to subjugate humanity. And so had allowed herself to be possessed by a demon to make that happen. I think we need to acknowledge that she made choice in that process.
Yes, yeah. She did make a choice, or presumably she made a choice.
The reader's understanding is that she made a choice.
Yeah, we don't actually, because like this book skips over all of the war that has happened. We just kind of get some of the aftermath. So we don't really see any of that. But Neve goes to visit Sierra in the hospital, and she somehow has enough presence of mind to switch bodies with Neve so that Neve is the one who is comatose and Sierra is in Neve's body. And then she smothers Neve, and it's a very big cliffhanger. I really don't enjoy, and this is a me problem, this is not a book problem, I really don't enjoy being made to like a main character and then that character getting killed off, particularly in a way that doesn't leave me time to grieve for them. which, because this is like the last page, you don't have time to grieve in the text at all.
See, and I don't think that Neve is dead because there has to be a second book, doesn't there?
I mean, there is going to be a second book, but I don't think that maybe Neve is going to come back somehow. I don't see how she could.
Because magic. So, like the magic here does not have that strict of rules.
That's true. Okay, but taking it at face value, because this is what we have been given in the first book. Like, I really don't enjoy being made to care for a character and then just bye. A main character.
I'm agreeing with you. I am saying that it's even worse. I feel like the narrative did that. I mean, Dawson did that just to string us along as readers because there has to be a second book and we have to read it. And I think that's part of the problem of series, and that in the first chapter, there's going to be some revelation that Neve is a spirit trying to get back now, and then everything's actually fine.
I don't know if I would say string along, but I definitely think that this was a decision made to get people to read book 2. Like, no doubt about that.
I really wish that wasn't a thing. I know. I know that's very unrealistic.
It's very unrealistic. Authors gotta eat.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm just being pissy. I just came off of editing the Locked Tomb series, the Harrow the Ninth episode we just did, which I had very similarly strong feelings about with why series are the worst. And I wish that you could just tell the story that you want to tell at the pacing you want.
What if that is a series?
Okay, but the break then in between chunks of the story is still like that's still a publishing cycle.
So what you're saying is that you want to read books all at once when the series is finished.
Yeah, I would much rather do that.
But that's a different thing from not wanting to read a series.
Well, then why would I ever buy a series when it first comes out? And then that means that all of those writers still don't get the money because now there's a bunch of people, theoretically, if I'm not the only one who feels this way, not buying the book. Then it would just seem like it's not like it's the same system. I'm saying in the system that has been created,
that is a problem. Like people don't buy series because they want to wait until it's finished, and then it's a cycle because then the author doesn't get to finish it. That's why in an ideal world, you buy all the books. If you're someone who doesn't want to wait between series, you buy the books, you wait to read them until the series is finished.
Oh, interesting. So you're suggesting that you buy the books but then wait to read them.
Yeah. You don't have to wait for the gap in between books when you're reading them that way. Author still gets paid.
Okay. Yeah. No, that works.
Anyway, we're getting off track again from talking about this book.
Well, how am I supposed to talk about this book without talking about how the ending is just a big fat case of blue balls?
This is one of those times where, yeah, I can see why you would want book 2, so you don't have to wait.
I heard we had a Words Are Weird. Which one did we decide upon?
We were going to do your very good story about the acronym HMRC.
One of the very fun, kind of realistic bureaucratic things about this story is that Her Majesty's Royal Coven, the main coven of the story, is often referred to as HMRC. And it makes it feel like, well, to borrow American slang, one of those 3-letter agencies, although that is mathematically inaccurate.
Just a little bit.
But it's the same vibe, right? Like, oh, it's one of those agencies, you know, they're doing their thing, it's bureaucratic, and that's pretty accurate for it in the story. But I like to read drama subreddits specifically about legal advice, so making fun of the subreddits that give legal advice. This is too much context. However, the point is, I was reading one about, I don't remember what it was. I think it was...
I say this with all the love in my heart. Does it really matter what the actual topic was?
No. I was just trying to give context for why HMRC came up. I don't remember what it was, but I was reading a post and suddenly someone was talking about dealing with HMRC, and I was like, excuse me, Her Majesty's Royal Coven? What? Except it turns out it refers to revenue and customs, and that's actually a real thing that people actually in the real world interact with.
It is a thing. It is an actual agency, government agency.
I guess everyone in the world knew that already, except I didn't. So that was a very bizarre, like, hold on. Are you secretly a witch? Is Reddit telling me that witches are real right now?
I love that interaction, though.
Oh, so timely, too. I never would have noticed that acronym if I hadn't been reading this book.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's the combination of the acronym and just the timing that makes that story so good.
Hell yeah. And then I had to Google it, and I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's a real thing. All right.
Yep.
And that makes this book so much funnier. Like, the fact that every time they were using HMRC, that was an acronym that's actually a thing.
I wonder, so because this book takes place in the real world, I guess it's classified as urban fantasy.
I don't think that's how that classification works, but okay, let's keep going.
I've seen it on Goodreads as urban fantasy.
Really? No.
Yeah, we can argue whether it really is or not.
No, magical
later,
realism and urban fantasy are not the same thing. Okay, I'm sorry. Keep going.
But that begs the question, presumably they have a revenue and customs agency in this UK. Is it also called HMRC? Is there just a secret second one?
Oh, I imagine it's the cover for Her Majesty's Royal Coven.
Don't they talk about at one point, and I don't remember this at all, they talk about their building in Manchester and what the cover story for it is. Maybe they do say revenue and customs. I don't remember.
HMRC's headquarters is in London. That's no fun. Can you imagine if HM Revenue and Customs headquarters was in Manchester?
That would be pretty funny. I was trying to look for the reference to their headquarters in Manchester, but given that I have a paper copy, not a Kindle ebook, it's a little harder to do a word search.
Oh, on Wikipedia, and it's just talking about taxes for some reason.
Gee, I wonder why.
Gross.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You could also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and a little bit of other nonsense.
Sometimes, anyway. It's been a while since we posted, but you can still support us on Patreon regardless. Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.